Hi there, welcome to my channel. My name is Timpy and I share watercolor tutorials for beginners on this channel on a regular basis. In today's tutorial, I will show you how to paint a simple yet realistic pine cone using watercolor. So let's get started. This tutorial is in real time and you should be able to sketch and paint this in less than 30 minutes. However, if you're struggling to sketch the pine cone, don't worry, as our focus here is the painting. You can download this sketch from my Facebook page. I have put the link in the description below, and then you can print it and trace on your watercolor sheet. So we'll start with step 1, which is starting with the sketch of the pine cone by looking at the reference picture. My reference picture is from unsplash.com and I'm very grateful to Todd Rapani for this beautiful reference. I'll put the link in the description down below in case you wish to check it out. I usually start off by drawing a rough outline, just like the boundary of the pine cone, and then identify the main shapes and sketch those out. You need not worry about making it an exact replica of your reference picture. If you're new here, please consider subscribing to my channel to support me and hit the notification bell to get notified about future videos. If you find this tutorial helpful, please hit the like button and leave a comment. This would really help me reach other beginner artists. And I would love to hear any suggestions you may have for future tutorials. Next, we will shade the shadow areas with pencil lightly. Usually artists do not do this step, but I decided to do this as I know that the shadows are really dark. We should not see the shading lines once the painting is complete. I would still recommend that you keep your sketch really light and you do this by applying minimal pressure while sketching. Okay, so our sketch is now complete and we can move on to step 2, which is basically painting the underlayer, which is going to be really light. So I'm just preparing my color mix using some Indian red and burnt umber, and you can see that the mixture is really watery, and we intentionally keep it watery because this is going to be the lightest part of our pine cone. And I'm using my size 6 synthetic round brush to paint the underlayer. So I'm using a professional watercolor sheet which is 100% cotton. So even if I have a lot of water on my brush, it will still absorb it. We are painting wet and dry paper here. So, but if you have a cellulose paper or inferior quality of sheet, that might not be the case. So I'd recommend that you control the amount of water on your brush. So don't have too much water on your brush. You can just tap it on the kitchen towel just to reduce the amount of water, or it'll start floating everywhere. And another thing to notice is that you can see that I have left white caps in between based on my sketch, so we don't want to fill those. Step 3, we'll start painting the mid-tones while the underlayer is still wet, and I'm now using burnt umber, and as you can see it's much darker in color with little amount of water. And I start doing a wash on top of the areas where we had identified the shadow areas while we were sketching. So we'll also add some sepia while this second layer is still wet, and you can see I'm just adding some diluted sepia color in certain areas which is kind of really dark, but we may have to do a series of layers to really achieve the contrast in values, and that's what's going to make our painting pop out. And as you all know that watercolor tends to dry out and it just completely fades, and you're like, oh, this is not what I was seeing earlier. And then you have to do a series of layers to really get that vibrancy and contrast that you want to see. So you need to be really patient while painting with watercolors. So I'm trying to not go in the areas where I have identified the white areas. Those are the areas where the light is falling, and it's always a good idea to look at your reference picture while you're painting just to see which areas are dark. So you can see I'm painting around those sort of underlayer in certain areas. This is more like a negative painting technique that I'm using just to give them more definition, and that you can do by when you're using contrasting colors. So our step 4 is adding some really dark color, and you can see that I have a richer consistency of sepia color on my brush now. It's just really rich, and that's why it's kind of standing out a bit more. And if you accidentally paint in some area, just like I did, I just used my kitchen towel to lift the paint back off the page, because I realized I've lost the white area where I wanted the light to show, and I just lifted that paint off while it was still wet. I also conduct watercolor classes for complete beginners on a weekly basis in smaller groups, where I'm able to interact with my students, answer their queries, and provide feedback on their finished paintings. If you're interested in joining my class, please DM me on Instagram or on my Facebook page, which is called Dimpy Council Art. If you happen to recreate this pine cone, please do tag me on Instagram and Facebook so I'm able to see your beautiful paintings. So as you all can notice, by painting these darker areas on our pine cone, we are actually starting to see that a painting is really coming together, because the lighter areas are sort of popping out. So as I said earlier, creating that contrast in your painting is really important. You also must have noticed that I've already painted the shadow, because I was just following my reference picture where the shadow was not that prominent. But because the edges are quite defined in my painting currently, I think it's not correct, and I would be showing you how to fix it in the next step. So our pine cone is now ready, it's all complete, but the next step that we'll do is fix any mistakes that you might have committed. I'm sure you wouldn't have done any mistakes, but in my case I did paint the shadow incorrectly. So I was just trying to follow the reference picture. Obviously in my reference picture the shadow was not very well defined, it was more of like fading into the space, but in my painting I painted the shadow in a way where it has really defined edges. So we just need staggered edges in this instance. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to soften the edge of the current shadow and try to paint another layer of a darker shadow and make it slightly bigger so I can actually show that the shadow is staggered. So I'm using a stiffer brush and just taken some clean water and I'm just scraping on the edge of the shadow, and once I've done that I've taken some darker shadow color which is Payne's gray, and I'm just painting over the original shadow. So with watercolors it is possible to fix your mistakes to some extent, but again I feel it's really time consuming, so I'd advise that you always plan your work in advance. Think about the various aspects, which I didn't really think about. I didn't think about the shadow part at all, and I just went for it, just painted it in one go. But it took me a lot of time later on to fix the shadow. It took me more time to fix the shadow than it actually took me to paint the pine cone. So that's just a word of advice. And I've just made my shadow slightly bigger because I just want to go beyond that original edge so it's not more prominent. So I'm taking my time to actually define the edges of the shadow because I'm using 100% cotton paper and it would not dry very easily. So I'm just taking my time to go over and over, the shadow shape and not just doing it in one wash. So this is how my final painting looks. I have not shown you the entire process of fixing the shadow, otherwise the tutorial would have been more about fixing shadows rather than the main painting. But I hope you got a glimpse and understanding of how you can actually fix your mistakes if you commit any. And also a bigger step is that you plan your painting in advance and think about the shadows well in advance than mess them up. I hope you found this tutorial helpful, and if you do like it, please consider subscribing and don't forget to hit the notification bell. I will see you in another tutorial very soon. Till then, take care. Bye.